Today I am in Gettysville, New York, which for those of you who aren't quite sure of its location is actually near Buffalo in the western part of the state. And I'm visiting here at the William S. Hein and Company Incorporated's still relatively new facility. And today I'm specifically pleased to be able to speak with two of the company's emerging generation of leaders. That's my term, not yours, gentlemen, so I can say it, I think. They are William Shannon Hein, who is the Vice President for Sales, who is on the right in the screen, and Shane Marmion, who is the Vice President for Product Development. William Shannon, it is my understanding that you prefer to be called Shannon, just by your second name, casually. So I will do so with your indulgence or permission.
Thank you.
This conversation, like others in the series, is part of the Oral History of Law Librarianship, which the Hein Company graciously has on its database called Hein Online. Most of the others, though, are a bit different in format. This one is, to begin with, not a one-on-one as most of the others are, but it's a group setting. There are three of us in the participating. I am hiding behind the camera and all the wires and lights. My name is Pat Keel. Today we're going to start somewhat like some of the other histories, but then we'll sort of go off in whatever direction the conversation carries us, if that's all right, gentlemen. Before we do, can we talk a little bit about you as individuals? Maybe we can start with Shannon and ask a little bit about your life, both not just today, but even when you were young. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Usually when I'm telling my story to friends and colleagues, you mentioned my first name being William and my middle Shannon. My grandfather was William Sylvester Hein, my father William Stewart Hein. I'm William Shannon Hein, and it's not that I ever preferred Shannon, it's just that my mother agreed to name me William as my first one to carry on in the family tradition, as long as she could pick the middle name and call me by it. So I've never gone by William or Bill or anything other than Shannon.
Or Junior.
Or Junior.
Well, actually it'd be the third, I guess, in that sense.
I think it would, but I think technically or legally it has to have the same middle names.
That's right.
Senior, junior.
Sounds like the family has differentiated at that level.
The third. So, very young, I can remember working in the business to varying degrees. In the late 70s, early 80s was maybe my first job, which was coming to work with my father on Saturdays and cleaning out the desk drawers in his office. And if I did, I was able to keep on any change, loose change that I found.
Oh, incentive, huh? He'd hide a few quarters in there and you'd dutifully do what he wanted.
Absolutely. And growing up, the oldest of 5 children, initially in my early life anyways, we grew up in Buffalo, New York. As I went through school, I would work at the Hein Company through my teenage years and spend time working in various departments, whether it be the book bindery, the print shop, microfiche, creating film masters, duplicating microfiche, all the different aspects of binding books in the print shop and printing presses. And it really taught me early on that it was a place I didn't ever really want to work, which was kind of interesting. And it turned out
not enough quarters in that drawer.
Not enough quarters in the drawer, and minimum wage wasn't cutting it. And so eventually, in my last years of high school, I ended up working in different places, whether it was a Office Max type of store or managing a pizzeria. Eventually, I decided to go off to college, and I went to the College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina. And
decided to get away from the lake effect snow, huh?
It was the snow. My wife and I, Denise, married pretty young, and we we ended up going off and going to college together. And it's as much her, I can credit her as much as anybody else for that decision and wanting to really kind of move away and start our lives and have a life separate from everything that we knew, and to experience something new outside of Buffalo. And as I went to college in Charleston, I swore to myself that I would never come back to work. I didn't want to come back to Buffalo. I didn't want to come back to the snow. And upon graduation, and when I was working there in Charleston, going to school, and I was at scuba diving, helped do scuba diving instruction and managed a scuba diving store. So it ends up being just part of my past and one of my hobbies and things that I plan to get back into again one of these days when I have some more spare time. After graduation, or even prior to graduation, my father would call me and ask me, do you want to come back and work for the Hein company? There's a job waiting for you here. And I would always tell him, no, I'm not interested, thank you very much. Find my own path in life. And as I got closer and closer to graduation and wasn't sure what I was going to do, he eventually made a proposal to me that was difficult to refuse, and that was to come and work for the company, but to be able to move to Littleton, Colorado, where the Fred B. Rothman company was headquartered. And so when I graduated college, we had purchased, the William S. Hein company had purchased Rothman the year before. And we needed somebody on the ground in Littleton to kind of oversee that transition and acquisition. And so I was given the opportunity at a very young age to move to Colorado. I thought this was great. I could work for the company. I could not live in Buffalo. My dreams were starting to come true.
Yeah, it's a couple of 1,000 miles farther west, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was okay. I had already made a move. I had already left for the Carolinas, for South Carolina, and it was an opportunity and a chance to maybe rejoin the company. And so this was in June of 1999 that I moved out there. I ended up spending about a little over a year, I think 14 months. I can remember having to hire a crew to bring the warehouse and all of the books and all of the journals and periodicals back to the Buffalo office and the Buffalo warehouse.
The pleasure of being in Colorado wasn't to last forever in this arrangement.
It wasn't to last forever. Somewhere between 50 and 55 full-size semi-trucks later,
Wow.
having shipped back those operations and having migrated different business functions back to the headquarters in Buffalo, it was time to really kind of close up shop. The office got really much smaller and consolidated in Colorado, and it didn't need an office manager, at least not from me anyways. And I was told, okay, your next assignment then will be to move to Buffalo, New York. And I said, oh, but this wasn't part of the deal. And part of that
deal?
Yeah, it wasn't part of the deal, but it wasn't long-lived either. I had to come back to Buffalo for about 9 months, and it's a period of my life that I call Hein School. And that was really, I had been gone a couple of years for college. I had been gone another year out in Colorado, and it was to really reacclimate myself with the products that had come out differently. I was never involved in product development. I had never been involved in sales. I was really, like I said, working in the warehouse, working in the print shop, working in the book bindery, working in microfilm. And I moved back in 2000, and which happened to be the same year that Hein Online was launched. And so I was able to get in on the ground floor, learn about Hein Online and everything that had been done. I missed the really formative in the early years of the development of the product from 1993 when we started to do digital capturing of images and digital reprinting, up to more of the development in like 1998, 1999 before it was eventually released in 2000. So I came to work right about the release date of it. It was periodicals. At the time, I knew what those were. I had opened enough of them, I'd handled enough of them, I had collated enough issues into volumes, and I had bound enough of them, so I certainly knew what Harvard Law Review was, and Columbia and Yale, and all the rest of them. And after that year in Buffalo, I spent the next probably year and a half, year to 2 years, I had moved out. I had been given the opportunity to move to Charlotte, North Carolina. I could choose any major city in the U.S. that I wanted, except the one that Dick Spinelli lived in, so that we were separated, and I would become an outside salesman for the company.
Awfully hot.
It is now. At the time, he was living in Chicago, Illinois.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Before he moved out to the desert in California, and I moved down to Charlotte for 5 years, and after my 1 year of Hein school in Buffalo, and that's where I raised my wife and I raised our first daughter. I spent a solid year traveling with Dick, visiting the academic law libraries in and around the United States, and about after that 5 years, 10 years ago, I was asked to move back to Buffalo again to have more of a footprint within the organization and with the staff, and to do more with other aspects of the business just besides outside sales to the U.S. Law School, ABA accredited law school academics. And I think I'll maybe pause there and can talk a little bit more about what that was like, but I've been back in Buffalo for the last 10 years doing more international sales and dabbling in product development and product licensing and things of that nature.
Good. Well, I appreciate your sharing so much with us, Shannon. Shane, you too have been with the company a while. Your role is a little different from your colleagues there. It's involved a little more in production and identifying what should be part of the database, Hein Online. Is that not correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Well, maybe before we get there and go there, let's ask a little bit about you as an individual. Tell us a little about your life.
Okay. Well, Shane's been my name since the beginning. It's never changed.
You didn't have to hide out
Start all the way
from
the
sheriffs and creditors, so you didn't have to change your name.
Born and raised in Buffalo. My father, Kevin, current president right now. Like Shannon, very much. My roots kind of go to when I was a kid and Saturdays and coming in.
Did he bribe you with quarters? Well, I know it was mine. I don't know what was in the drawer. Maybe jelly beans.
I remember my brother and I running around the building, wreaking havoc, and that's my, so the earliest days of remembering the company were, just early childhood. And when I turned 16, got my working papers, wanted to start getting a paycheck, so I had the opportunity to come to Hein and work, and from there they put me in where they needed me, so I worked in shipping and receiving, inventory control, like Shannon, at all aspects of probably production, the bindery, microfilm. And then Hein Online was getting started as I was in high school and going to college, so I was getting involved very much with the scanning process. Before we actually had automated scanners, I stood behind and manually fed page by page, tedious, scanning in the beginning stages. I remember in high school, Hein Online was originally hosted out of Cornell University, so we had to get all the images and the content, the metadata transferred there, and when we were doing the periodicals in the archives of the Harvard Law Review, Columbia, we would burn the material to CDs and deliver CDs in the mail. So I was getting involved on the technical aspects, parts of Hein Online at that point. I did go away to college for a year, went to Fredonia State, played soccer there for a year, got homesick and came home, transferred to University of Buffalo.
Well, that's a good place. And close.
Yeah. So and throughout that transition, I worked mostly part-time at the company, and in those areas of Hein and imaging. I got my BS Business Administration, University of Buffalo, and when I graduated in 2002, I got an opportunity to work at beginning our imaging department and working in digital print. You know, I never was really forced into working there. I had the opportunity when I was 16 to get a job, and I always liked what I did. I kind of enjoyed, you know, the production aspect of it and learning about the company as I was in high school and college. And when I came out of college, an opportunity came up to kind of work in a coordinator type role and work on building the infrastructure of our imaging department. And we had our first automated scanner, our Kodak scanner, that, you know, we went from like 1,000 pages an hour to 4,000 or 5,000 pages an hour in automation, do duplex scanning, and from there I got to help build kind of the infrastructure of our imaging department. We still had printing presses at the time, but we had Xerox digital print engines, and so the transition kind of from presses to digital print worked. Then very much got involved in the management of Heinlein production, imaging, and then later on Heinlein development. So today I'm doing Heinlein development, kind of overseeing the production areas, very much involved with sales and marketing. I did on a personal level with the company. I met my wife here about 10 or 11 years ago. We just celebrated our 8-year anniversary last week. And we have 2 daughters. My oldest, 6, is Addison. She's 6 years old. She's in 1st grade. My youngest, Quinn, will be 2 in January. I guess that, you know, that brings us up to date.
Very good. Well, you've already talked a little bit about your lives. I might follow that up if sometimes in these conversations and ask, and I'll start with you, Shane, if you have any particular hobbies or special interests by continuing the introduction and throwing you completely off. I'll mention that we're all going to the Bills game tonight, so I figure that's probably one of your hobbies or interests, but you have hobbies and interests?
Well, you know, big fan of Buffalo and in sports, so I'm a big Bills fan. I am a Green Bay Packer fan, and my father's a huge Bills fan, so naturally I'm a Bills fan. And he introduced me to the Packers only because, tell the story real quick, because everybody wonders how I'm a Packer fan in Buffalo. But when I was like 8 years old and he was just getting me into football, there was a quarterback for the Green Bay Packers named Don Mikowski that was on like the cover of Sports Illustrated, and I was like amazed by it that he lived 15, 20 minutes away from me. And from there, I just never stopped following the Packers, and so it's helped over the last 16 years as the Bills have been on a playoff drought to have a team I can rely on getting the playoffs every once in a while. But so yeah,
The trouble is, if they're ever up against each other, then your loyalties will have to be figured out.
yeah. Well, I'm a goalie in ice hockey. My wife's a big runner, so she gets me into running. I've ran some half marathons. Big into, you know, following the Bills and Sabres, big sports fan. And now with the 2 little ones, very much the hobby of getting them to dance and gymnastics and swimming and soccer, everything that they're getting involved in has been kind of taking up my time nowadays. So
Being a full-time dad
Exactly,
does take up one's time. Well, Shannon, you too must have something on the side in terms of interests or special hobbies. You want to share any of those with us?
Yeah, I think, like Shane alluded to it, we're now in our just past 16 years without the Buffalo Bills making the playoffs, and over that time I've drifted a little bit more towards college and have so many opportunities during my travels and having the opportunity to visit so many universities and colleges around the United States, and it's really kind of opened my eyes and become more of a college fan than a pro football fan a little bit. I don't admit that out loud a whole lot around here. I still love the Bills, and I will still go to.
Well, college ball is exciting. I mean, and you know, everyone's so enthusiastic in perhaps a different way than with the pros in some ways.
It can be. It's a different experience. Go Clemson. my South Carolina team.
Sure.
So, and really because of, what I do for travel, I'm gone probably away from home, on the road, just over 30% of the year or a third of the year, so more than 100 days a year. Most of that the majority of that is overseas, and my biggest hobby is probably my family and my kids. My wife and 2 daughters. My daughter, Winter Scarlett, is just turned 16. We keep the initials with her, or the WS Hein.
That's the plan, huh?
And at the moment, she has no interest in coming to work at the Hein Company.
You didn't either at that age, you told us.
I didn't until I was much older than her, so I don't even ask her or pressure her or anything like that. Our younger daughter, Piper Snow, is just 4 years old. So.
PS sign? No, doesn't work the same.
Well, it doesn't, but they're 11 and a half years apart, so that PS she's kind of the PS at the end of the letter, at the end of the...
I think I get the drift of what you're suggesting.
At the end of the family, so we think she's our last.
You probably are right, but you just never know.
You never know. It's not often up to us, is it?
That's true.
And so I do love sports. I do love travel. It's probably
Well, I'm glad you love travel. 30% of the year you're on the road, you said.
and yeah, travel's a big one. And
But maybe by travel you mean the interesting places where you're not trying to meet with customers?
I sometimes have opportunities to, most of my travel is for work, for sure. But if you're at a conference overseas, for example, very often an event is just in an amazing congressional library or parliamentary library, or you're at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, or there's receptions or functions. And so even through work, if I go to Sydney, I can see the Harbor Bridge, I can see the Opera House. There's just things that you end up seeing by nature of being there. And I think it's something my father taught me to appreciate, because even before I worked for the company, I was very young and he would take me along on business trips with him. And we would either spend a day or maybe 2 after the end of the trip and explore. He loved, and he still loves to do it, to get in the car and go plot something out on a piece of paper that resembles a map. Since he doesn't use the technology side of that, things in life.
He's Mr. Technology to those of us that are aware of Hein Online. You all are, but he still likes the old analog version of it.
Yeah, the company's still Mr. Technology, but he's a little bit of a throwback in the sense that he's never owned a cell phone. Still doesn't to this day.
Oh, heavens. How can you live without, not just a cell phone, we never talk on them anymore.
There's
everything else they do.
There's tens to hundreds of people within 100 yards of you on every single day that you can borrow one from.
Yeah.
We all carry them. It's ubiquitous with our lives now, and so they're there. But yeah, does he use my cell phone? Absolutely. Does he use my cell
So
phone?
he's not put off by the technology, he
No.
just doesn't quite have one himself.
Yeah, I
That's
think
all right.
it's a choice to stay off the grid like that a little bit, and because it can become, all-consuming, and you can be working all waking hours, and now you can get your email, and I think even it wasn't so long ago, but when I first started working for the company, I had a pager or a beeper.
Oh, I remember having one of those for a number of years.
That's the way it was.
Yeah.
Different times.
One time I was carrying a pager, we were doing the annual meeting in Washington DC, when pagers were still the way to get people in a pinch. And I was driving in from my home out in the suburbs, which was about 25 miles out, and the thing went off, and I was so impressed that I was way out of the city and it was still working.
Right.
Then I had to hunt around for an old-fashioned pay telephone to check in, because you didn't have anything like a cell phone in those days. A few people had car phones, but they were a whole different kind of thing than what we have today.
Correct.
Yeah, it was interesting. So you you have some experience with those years ago too.
Just a little bit. I mean, we kind of came in on the age of just before cell phone and email, so we had that little bit of experience of life before it, yet we were still young enough when it was right there and ready for the take, and now it's just completely immersed in it, and our lives are completely intertangled in those types of technologies and ways of communication.
Even the kind of product the company deals with now. I mean, Shane, you mentioned earlier that we're doing microfilm and some bookbinding and printing was still prevalent. You pretty well probably moved beyond those sorts of products, if I'm not correct. Please correct me, but
Yeah, no, we've closed our bindery about a year or so ago, so we're outsourcing what's left of what we're still producing there.
yeah.
And we just recently also closed down our microfilm, and we've got a company that's outsourcing what's left of kind of that part of the business. So we are strictly here in this building, all digitization, indexing, Hein online. We do have a digital print engine downstairs, so we do some issue runs and some perfect bound jobs and drills, but it's predominantly all on the online part of the business.
I'll imagine that's been an interesting transformation for both of you, and
Absolutely,
will in
especially.
all likelihood continue.
Yeah, the old building, one of the other transformations just from being here 20 years and seeing, you know, 1285, and I'm sure they talked about the history and the 4 floors, and when I started, the entire second floor was production and bindery and print. And as I was working there all the time, I was involved even with the downsizing of those areas and the transition. And then 3-4 years ago, we came into this building, and it just now, like seeing where we are today versus where we were 5-10 years ago, is an amazing transformation for going from the traditional print to an online. A lot of drastic changes in a short period of time.
Before we transition into talking a little bit about the company and the products and so on, I want to sort of mention to the viewers that we're in a working building, and there's a fairly noisy operation nearby, and they probably can hear from time to time the banging of whatever, and it's not construction, but I think it's you have a kitchen cafeteria on the other side of this wall. It's sort of the right time of the day for the fellow who runs that to be pretty busy, so you know, we'll hope they'll all indulge in occasional noise in the background. Good. Well, let's sort of focus a little bit. I think maybe start with you, Shannon, if possible, because you mentioned already that part of your role is to travel, but not necessarily just domestically. Years ago, I suppose the prime customer base for the company was academic law libraries here in the United States. And then that broadened a bit, and now with your product Hein online, it's one of the most popular, my term, maybe it's not the right one, popular database available worldwide for libraries that want access to American legal materials. So you have seen that part. You mentioned some of the places you've been. Could you talk about perhaps, you know, the two of you guys are sort of tagged at the moment as possibly the heir apparents for your parents, and in leading the company and, you know, its next big phase of continued development. You want to talk a little bit about some of your thoughts there, maybe some of the aspirations? And I realize that technology can change so dramatically, as can a lot of things, that, you know, predict ahead more in about 2 days. You're probably going to have some surprises, but you want to try to do a little of that?
Yeah, I mentioned that I started working in 1999, at least full-time for the company in the early days of Hein Online, which was released in 2000. We used to, I can remember a talk that I traveled with Dick, who was really one of my my first and earliest mentor in the the company, Dick Spinelli, who would take me around and introduce me to ABA accredited academic law libraries in the United States. And Hein was a secondary product. So we were selling books, sets, runs of books, fill-in books, and microfiche was the primary thing. We would walk into a library with a folder full of brochures. We would sit down at a catalog, and I don't know if you would call it online, it wasn't necessarily connected to the internet.
Some of them were in-house jobs that you couldn't access at all outside.
And even in some places, even then, we had to go to card catalogs to look through the paper catalog records, and we would see had they purchased this, had they not purchased this. We'd walk through the stacks and walk through the shelves and survey the library and look for things that were missing or incomplete sets, and then we would go and try to sell these types of products. And then, oh hey, by the way, here's Hein Online. It's the new thing.
The afterthought,
The afterthought, I think that our boss, Kevin Marmion, had the foresight to know that it was the future.
Yeah.
And we sold it as that as well, but I'm not sure that everybody believed it early on. Email worked, and you could text files back and forth, and you could do HTML and rekeying and Word documents, but the concept of bringing exact facsimile scanned copies in a PDF format delivered online was a really novel concept, and Hein and JSTOR were two of the early ones to do it in conjunction with the University of Michigan and Cornell University. And we really credit Kevin Marmion for bringing those things forward. And as time went on, I had been around with Dick Spinelli, and I had met as many people as I could meet, and I think he thought it was time to move on. But as Hein Online gained in popularity, we also realized that this is a pretty finite market. At the time, there were less than 200 law schools in the United States. And what could Shannon Hein do to help further the company? And it turned out that I started to take Hein Online as a product and introduce it into the U.S. federal agency market. So whether that be the Securities and Exchange Commission, National Labor Relations Board, Federal Trade, all of them. I started to visit and make contacts and promote the product there. And not long after that, it started to take hold in law firms, and eventually I started traveling with my father. So I kind of left Dick Spinelli in a sense, although we still work closely together and still travel together from time to time. I started to travel with my father, and my father started to introduce me to his international contacts. We were doing some business in the UK, some in Canada, some in Australia, and some in Japan. And I would start to go and spend a couple weeks at a time in these different countries and travel around the countries and promoting the product and saying, this is what it is. We have all these great law journals, and Hein Online started as, I believe the first release in May of 2000 was 25 titles, 270,000 pages, all pre-1923 content. And so we would talk to librarians, and we would say, all right, we did this, we accomplished this, it's all in the public domain, it's out of copyright, you can remove these things from your shelf. That was the early volumes, that was really the goal. And as you listen to feedback, the next thing that people asked for was, well, could you take that early gap and go up to 1980, fill in that gap, so at least we can fill in the gap where Westlaw and Lexis start. So we started to go out, and Kevin Marmion really licensed that content, and we started to grow the database that way. And then once we finished that, the next bit of feedback was great. Now could you go from 1980 forward? We would say, but we've done everything you've asked up to this point. Why in the world would you want it?
Because we're demanding.
Well, we want it in one place. We want to be able to search for it and retrieve it, and we don't want to have to know if it's pre-1980, go to Hein, post-1980, go to another database. And so we did that. Mm-hmm. And we've continued ever since then to license journals, and now we just added the 2,300th journal to the database. Shane will be able to talk a little bit more about the number of pages and content and volumes, and we're continuing to license more than 100 new titles a year. So we've come back with feedback myself from the federal agency saying that the Federal Register was the next best thing to do, and so we digitized the Federal Register. And
I
then
remember our librarians, my colleagues at American U, when Dick came in, and that was part of the conversation about the register. I
Right.
remember that. So that was next?
That was the second one. Third might have been the U.S. Supreme Court reports. I could be mistaken on
I
that.
understand earlier, I heard in an earlier session that was a little controversial because everybody sort of had those and there were many versions, print versions of that out there, including some that weren't supposed to be. And then West and Lexus, or one of them, had put those in their database, but modernized the terminology a bit here and there. And so you weren't going to do that.
No, everything has to be historical and identical. So even if while we're going through the quality control, quality check processes, we can find a typo. That was an original typeset typo, but we don't replace it. We don't fix that because we want it to be archival. We want it to be an exact facsimile. And really, that's one of my main jobs, is to go out and to talk to people and say, okay, what next? I tell people we don't have a mad genius locked up in a cage in the basement that's coming up with all of these ideas. And now that Hein Online, it was law journals to Federal Register to congressional documents to whatever else we've done, taxation and women in the law and the things that are upcoming, there's now more than 60 components and individual parts that make up Hein Online. So the misnomer is that, oh, we subscribe to the Hein Online Law Journal Library. Yeah, we subscribe to Hein Online. Well, you subscribe to a portion of it, you're missing 59 other pieces. That can become a value. And the more that we add, so there was some flack in the early days from the Supreme Court reports, but now that we can do more citation analysis, and you can be reading a law journal article and have a cite to a Supreme Court case, you can click on it, go to it. We didn't have that technical ability back when we did it, but those are things that under Shane's watch have really been developed, all of the much more technical aspects, and it's something that I'm really proud of the work that Shane does, and to see. I'm still amazed every month, our monthly newsletter. Sometimes I'm learning about things for the very first time, other things I knew about them because it took a while in development, and it brings me great joy to read that and go, wow, why didn't I think of that? And very often, it wasn't us that thought of that. It's the library, it's a librarian, it's a suggestion. And then the challenge is to go back and technically figure out, is that possible? How can we do it? How can we tweak this and change this? So Hein Online has grown to include, the reason it's been so popular overseas is we've gone beyond American content. There's a lot of, I wouldn't call it foreign content, but a lot more international content in terms of licensing, and a lot of that happens out of Kevin Marmion's office and out of Shane's office, licensing with the different types of publishers, both in the United States and abroad, to bring together a really nice aggregation of content that the customer would be interested in.
Well, the cost of putting all of this together and keeping it together has got to be fairly immense, and I imagine it's very helpful to broaden the customer base as much as you can, so that you don't have to assess everybody the amount that it would take to be able to continue to produce the thing, and have too few customers having trouble coming up with the wherewithal to subscribe.
Yeah, had we not grown to the point where we are, we'd probably be in more trouble than we would care to admit. And you can't stay still. You have to continue to grow. And so as I continue to work on the international market. I've stepped away from the U.S. domestic market to a large degree, and even though I'm the sales guy, I'm much more of the international sales. And the sales just in this last year even for our domestic has transferred over to Shane with an emphasis on how do we grow our market inside of the United States beyond just law, leveraging the different content that we've added that was both political science and government documents. And I can certainly leave Shane to discuss that area of growth and where we're headed.
Maybe by way of that, Shane, do you want us to take over at this point? Talk a little bit about some of those areas.
Absolutely. So with the non-law, we've just recently, probably the last 6 months or so, started to put together a sales and marketing program to really go after universities now with non-law programs. And we've had a government politics and law package available for the last few years, but we really hadn't put a big concentration on it. And we got the right product, and we're starting to grow. We're starting to grow outside of law. And one of the nice, we talk about technology and data analysis. With the Law Journal Library being indexed in Google Scholar, we have the ability to see IP addresses that are trying to access Hein Online but are not able to get in, and it's very much universities throughout the U.S. and even internationally. So that's kind of helping us focus on who we think would be the best candidates and going forth in that regard. In terms of Hein Online and databases and growth, Shannon mentioned some numbers in terms of we have over 60 databases, and we're approaching 140 million pages of digitization, and still going at 1 million pages a month. They're very large sets that we've done over the years: the Federal Register, Congressional Record, all the state session laws, the state reports that we're still kind of working on. And some of those, as we're digitizing all those large sets, and they're all in Hein Online, we're kind of running out of those large things to kind of go after. So we're doing a lot more as custom, unique databases. We just took a National Survey of State Laws, which was a print publication published by Gale in the past, and we just took the 7th edition and made a really unique database version out of it for the usability of that. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot more of where kind of we go in terms of content delivery in an online format and specialized, customized databases. We've working on a death penalty collection. We have religion in the law, women in the law. We're working on slavery. So content-wise, we're working on some specialized collections like that. And then when it comes to the database, it's constantly looking at research and development and features and how do you improve the performance in search. Search being such an important part of research, and text and data mining and natural language processing. Trying to implement a thesaurus across your search to provide better results and relevancy, delivering through email, electronic table of contents alerts, text messaging. We had a customer just recently, via our Twitter, even our communications changed and evolved with technology. We get phone calls, emails, live chats, with social media, the communication with customers, and really the Hein Online is built off the customer feedback, and it's been through at least 3 or 4 interface changes, but all those components and features of the product are a lot generated from the customer feedback. So just a couple of weeks ago, we had tweeted a suggestion if they download a PDF outside of the database and they want to be able to get back to where their research was from the PDF, and they asked if we could add a link back to the research, which being a smaller company and having the ability to implement development changes on the fly, we were able to implement that within a couple of days. And we got QR codes, so you have a QR code scanner, bring a PDF right to your phone instantly. And that's where I think the future of Hein Online and the database is going to continue to be in researching.
So you're really evolving as the technology evolves and new ways of possibly doing some of this stuff evolves.
Front end and back end, with Hein Online being an image-based product and OCR being key to our full text searching, because we don't go through the expensive cost of rekeying and fixing that, correcting the OCR. That's how we keep our subscription prices, low.
And the cost of rekeying keying also has another cost, and when Lexus was new, they had, because of the competitor owning the database and not letting them have it, they had to key everything in. And the old joke in many years is when we were doing Boolean logic searches to find access to stuff, you had to know how to misspell it the way the typist Lexus did, or you weren't going to find it. Yeah, so I applaud, I think you're taking exactly the right approach of putting the absolute original in there, because that's what people want, and they need in their research. And if the court had a typo, that's not our problem, it's the way it is. Yeah, that's how I see it. Well, it sounds like it's sort of a fascinating time for you, and you're branching out into sales and so on as well.
It's been fun. Working closely with Shannon. In my earlier days, I was more in production. He was sales when he wasn't around, and our offices are now right next to each other, so we've kind of built a better.
Well, I hope you realize that sales is a misnomer, because you're really the gossip columnist who comes around. Dick and others when they'd come to visit, well, we knew what you already sold, and we either had it or we couldn't afford it or we'd get it. And so it wasn't, he wasn't there really making sales particularly, but he sure gave us the scuttlebutt of what was going on around the places, and in terms of especially people.
Yeah, I think the company has always specialized in providing information.
Yeah.
Whether that
yeah, you're right. It was information.
whether it was legal information, or who's retiring, or who's moving, or what positions are open around the country, we can sometimes privy to some of that information before it's public as well.
Well, that was always part of the charm of having any of the sales reps come through, especially Dick and people of his caliber who were well connected and willing to share. Didn't worry about getting a certain quota met each time they visited. It was the ongoing relationship that I, as a customer, found a lot more useful than a hot shot comes in, makes a quick sale, and disappears. So that's the approach you always have used.
Yeah, it's the relationship that's more important than the money.
And today, when you're wanting to find out what the users find useful and approaches, and what maybe could be enhanced, it's got to be a wonderful two-way way of obtaining that information. Some of it.
It is, and Shane said because we're smaller, because we're very agile, people know that if they suggest it and we can do it, we'll do it.
Well, we probably talked a bit about the company and yourselves. It's sort of customary, we're probably approaching the end of today's session, to ask both of you if there's anything that we've not talked about that you would like to bring in.
I think personally I've covered the things that I would like to talk about. It'll be interesting because I have a feeling that we're some of the younger ones to have done this, which started out as retired librarians.
The old Rex, like myself, huh? You can say it.
And so it'll be interesting to look back on it in 20 years and to maybe even have a redo.
A rebuttal to what you said.
A rebuttal, and we can laugh at ourselves and see how right or how wrong we.
It sort of did begin thinking that it would be the established people who'd been in major leadership in the associations and were very prominent in the field would be the stories. But, we have broadened it. Sometimes somebody has done something. I read the Law Library Journal, and guess where I sometimes read it? And I'm online. But I also get the paper one, well, they still have it. And I read an article and somebody writes something that's sort of provocative and interesting. And So we've invited some of those people to be part of this history. And in doing the conversations, we talk about some of the things that were basically underpinning that article and came out in it. So it serves that purpose. Also, there are some younger people who have already done some rather interesting things, and we include them. So you guys are sort of in that category. Unless you've written something for the Law Library Journal that I missed.
Not yet, right?
No, we wrote plenty of blogs and emails and website pages and ads, and our writing just comes out in different avenues.
Yeah. Well, it's all important in its own way, yeah. Probably more so than some of the other stuff that comes out in those ways.
We wouldn't pretend to be more important than anything else.
Yeah. Well, maybe on the basis of that, Shannon and Shane, I should thank you for participating today and being on camera. You've all been around the oral history since the company puts it on Hein online and sort of was involved in getting it all started and keeping it going, and, which we appreciate, or I certainly do, because in thanking you, I have the pleasure of being here in the room and having all the fun of coming and talking to you. But
Thank you for all of your efforts in the whole project. 'Cause
Thank you.
It wouldn't be what it is if it wasn't for you.
well, I also should mention, of course, I'm not the only one on my side. Michelle Wu and Frank Hodak and, of course, Dick Spinelli have had a tremendous major roles in putting this thing together. And in thanking you for participating today, I'm thanking you on their behalf as well as my own. Thank you.
We thank you all, especially Pat, for today. Thank you.